These are the 13 films that cost studios over $150 million in losses in 1980. Audiences flocked to theaters that year in record numbers, pushing the domestic box office to $1.642 billion. And while The Empire Strikes Back dominated screens, a collection of bloated productions and misguided vanity projects were hemorrhaging money at an unprecedented rate. Let's get straight into it. No discussion of 1980s disasters can begin anywhere else because Heaven's Gate remains the most infamous box office failure in cinema history. Director Michael Cimino had just won the Best Director Oscar for The Deer Hunter the day before production began, and United Artists gave him something almost unheard of in the industry: unlimited creative control. That decision would haunt them for the rest of the studio's existence. The original budget sat at $11.6 million, but by the time cameras stopped rolling, the number had ballooned to $44 million. $1 in 1980 equals roughly $3.95 today, which puts the scope of this disaster into perspective. Cimino shot 1.3 million feet of film, translating to over 220 hours of footage, and he routinely demanded 50 or more takes of individual scenes. The crew nicknamed him the Ayatollah. An entire period boomtown rose from the ground on location in Montana, and a working steam locomotive traveled from a Denver museum just for authenticity. Cameras were supposed to stop rolling in June 1979, but filming didn't wrap until March 1980, nearly a year behind schedule. The American Humane Association documented verified animal cruelty on set during production. Real cockfights appeared on camera, and at least 4 horses perished during filming. 1 horse was destroyed with explosives, though the rider survived, and cattle were disemboweled for battle sequences. The AHA found themselves barred from the set entirely, and this scandal directly led to the Screen Actors Guild contractually authorizing the AHA to monitor all animal use in filmed media. That's the origin of those "no animals were harmed" disclaimers you see today. November 19, 1980 brought the premiere, and Vincent Canby of the New York Times delivered what many consider the most devastating review in cinema history. Canby called it an unqualified disaster and a forced 4-hour walking tour of one's own living room. His suggestion was that Cimino had sold his soul to the devil to obtain the success of The Deer Hunter, and the devil has just come around to collect. Roger Ebert called it the most scandalous cinematic waste he had ever seen. United Artists pulled the film after just 1 week. Cimino re-edited it down to 149 minutes for an April 1981 re-release, but audiences still stayed away. One UA executive noted it was as if somebody called every house in the country and said, "There will be a curse on your family if you go see this picture." $3.5 million. That's what the film grossed against its $44 million budget, with estimated losses exceeding $40 million. Transamerica Corporation sold United Artists to Kirk Kerkorian's MGM in 1981 for $350 million, and the 60-plus year independent studio effectively ceased to exist. Cimino's career entered what's politely called dormancy for 5 years, and he made only 4 more films without ever achieving commercial or critical success again. A 2012 Criterion Collection restoration sparked critical reappraisal, and BBC Culture named it one of the 100 greatest American films. Christopher Walken later reflected, "Nowadays, movies cost $200 million to make. The scandalous price of Heaven's Gate was $44 million. It's a beautiful movie. Go and feast your eyes." Producer Lou Grade had grand ambitions, envisioning a Dirk Pitt franchise that would rival James Bond, but instead he delivered one of the decade's most legendary financial disasters. Grade commissioned a 55-foot scale model of the Titanic costing between $5 and $6 million, and he constructed a 10 million gallon water tank in Malta for an additional $6 million. Before a single scene had even been filmed, the budget had already ballooned from $16 million, eventually reaching somewhere between $35 and $40 million. Approximately 17 writers worked on the screenplay, and novelist Larry McMurtry was, according to reports, the only one not to petition for a credit. Director Stanley Kramer departed over creative differences, which left Jerry Jameson to helm the picture. August 1st, 1980 brought the opening, and the film grossed just $7 million domestically, about $13 million worldwide. The estimated loss ran between $28 and $33 million. Grade delivered one of cinema history's most memorable quotes about the disaster. "It would have been cheaper to lower the Atlantic." Author Clive Cussler was reportedly nearly in tears when he saw the finished product, saying he didn't know where all the money went because the film looked so cheap. Film rights to any other novels stayed off the table for over 20 years, and when Cussler finally relented with Sahara in 2005, that film also flopped and resulted in litigation. This disaster, combined with Can't Stop the Music and Saturn III, devastated Grade's ITC Entertainment, and he was eventually forced to resign. Producer Alan Carr was riding the success of Grease when he announced this film in June 1979 as Singing in the Rain for the Disco Crowd. The original title was Disco Land, Where the Music Never Ends. One problem stood in the way. Disco Demolition Night happened on July 12, 1979, before filming even began. By the time Can't Stop the Music reached theaters in June 1980, disco had become culturally toxic. The $20 million production deliberately minimized references to the Village People's gay fan base, with the group members essentially pretending to be everyday guys. This approach confused the family audience they were targeting while alienating the gay community who formed the band's core following. $2 million. That's what the film grossed domestically, creating an $18 million loss. A fascinating piece of Hollywood history emerged from this disaster. A man named John J.B. Wilson saw a Can't Stop the Music and Xanadu double feature in August 1980, paying 99 cents admission. Wilson still wanted his money back, but the theater refused a refund. That frustration inspired him to create the Golden Raspberry Awards, and Can't Stop the Music won Worst Picture and Worst Screenplay at the first Razzie ceremony on March 31, 1981. Alan Carr had predicted that Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn Jenner, would become the Robert Redford of the 80s. A Razzie nomination for Worst Actor followed, and Jenner didn't appear in another film until Jack and Jill in 2011, 31 years later. That film also won Worst Picture at the Razzies, which means Jenner remains the only actor to appear in two different Worst Picture winners. Irwin Allen was known as the Master of Disaster, having produced The Poseidon Adventure in 1972 and The Towering Inferno in 1974. For his final theatrical film, he attempted a volcano disaster epic, and things went poorly from the start. Warner Brothers cut the budget dramatically halfway through production, which severely compromised the special effects. Elaborate volcano models and the hotel miniature explosion were scrapped entirely, and most of the star-studded cast just wanted to fulfill their obligations and move on. Paul Newman, William Holden, Jacqueline Bisset, Ernest Borgnine, and Burgess Meredith were all contractually obligated from their Towering Inferno deals. William Holden was struggling with alcoholism during filming, and director James Goldstone reportedly sidelined him during complicated stunt sequences for presenting danger to himself and others. The $20 million production grossed just $3.76 million domestically, and the film holds 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Leonard Maltin dubbed it "When Ideas Ran Out" and gave it his lowest rating. Larry King asked Paul Newman in a 1998 interview if he ever regretted making any film. Newman's bitter response, "That volcano movie." This was Irwin Allen's last theatrical release, effectively ending both his feature film career and the 1970s disaster movie cycle. The genre remained dormant for 16 years until CGI revived it with Twister and Independence Day in 1996. Universal paid Peter Benchley a then-record $2.15 million for the film rights, the largest amount ever paid for book rights at that time. A first-draft screenplay deal came with it, along with 10% of gross and approval of crew and locations. They expected another Jaws. What they got was a bizarre premise about a 300-year-old hidden pirate colony in the modern Caribbean that takes boaters to replenish their inbred gene pool. The film lurched between grim brutality and inappropriate comedy, alienating the family-friendly adventure audience Universal had targeted. The $22 million production grossed somewhere between $10 and $15 million domestically, depending on the source. Michael Caine received a Worst Actor nomination at the first Golden Raspberry Awards, and Leonard Maltin gave it his lowest rating, calling it absolutely awful. Caine refuses to discuss this film in interviews, which is notable for an actor famous for candidly discussing his paycheck movies. About Jaws, "The Revenge," he once said, "I have never seen it, but by all accounts it is terrible. However, I have seen the house that it built for my mum, and it is terrific. Yet the island remains off limits. This failure effectively ended Benchley's screenwriting career in Hollywood. The director situation proved chaotic from the start. John Barry, the acclaimed production designer behind A Clockwork Orange, Star Wars, and Superman, was making his directorial debut. According to Stanley Donen, who eventually took over, Barry had hardly ever been on a set and knew next to nothing about staging a scene or handling actors. Kirk Douglas allegedly made things difficult, and Barry was removed from the project. Barry tragically passed from meningitis during pre-production of The Empire Strikes Back, before Saturn III had even reached theaters. Harvey Keitel's entire performance ended up dubbed by British actor Roy Dotrice. Multiple explanations circulate. Keitel refused post-production participation, Lew Grade demanded his Brooklyn accent be replaced, or Donen wanted an upper-class veneer. Keitel's biographer called Saturn III the nadir of his career. Novelist Martin Amis, who wrote the screenplay, based a character in his novel Money on Kirk Douglas, Lorne Guyland, an aging star obsessed with his own virility. The age gap between Douglas at 64 and Farrah Fawcett at 32 struck many as particularly uncomfortable. The $10 million production grossed just $4.9 million worldwide, marking another Lew Grade disaster. Olivia Newton-John was riding high from Grease, but critics savaged this roller disco fantasy musical. Esquire magazine delivered the famous verdict, in a word, Zana don't. Universal canceled press screenings before release, a clear vote of no confidence from the studio. Gene Kelly's character, Danny Maguire, had previously appeared in CoverGirl in 1944, making Xanadu a loose sequel. Kelly never made another theatrical film after this, later reflecting, "The concept was marvelous, but it just didn't come off." Director Robert Greenwald won Worst Director at the inaugural Razzie ceremony. Michael Beck, who had broken through in The Warriors, later offered this assessment: "The Warriors opened a lot of doors in film for me, which Xanadu then closed." The $20 million production actually grossed $22.8 million domestically, so technically it wasn't a complete financial disaster. Marketing costs likely pushed it into the red, and the critical reception proved devastating. Here's the thing though, while the film failed, the soundtrack achieved double platinum certification with 5 top 20 singles. Olivia Newton-John's Magic spent 4 weeks at #1, and Xanadu with ELO hit #1 in the UK. The film eventually became a cult classic and was adapted into a Tony-nominated Broadway musical running for 512 performances between 2007 and 2008. Playwright Douglas Carter Beane quipped, "This is what happens when you let straight men near the musical. I blame the nose candy." George C. Scott and Marlon Brando were the only 2 actors to reject the Best Actor Oscar, and their first and only on-screen pairing seemed like an irresistible package. The result disappointed everyone. The conspiracy thriller about synthetic fuel suppression proved hopelessly confused and dull. $3 million went to Brando for just 3 scenes totaling between 17 and 21 minutes of screen time, and he used a hidden earpiece feeding him his lines throughout. His autobiography later called the film a stinker. The $13.2 million production grossed $8.89 million. Brando took a 9-year hiatus from film after the formula, not returning until A Dry White Season in 1989. This one gets complicated. The $20 million production grossed $27.1 million domestically and about $50 million worldwide, making it a genuine hit in the UK and Italy. American audiences stayed away, and that underperformance ended plans for a trilogy. A fascinating piece of trivia connects this to cinema history. George Lucas originally wanted to make a Flash Gordon film in the early 1970s, but couldn't acquire the rights from producer Dino De Laurentiis. That rejection directly led Lucas to create Star Wars instead. Sam J. Jones clashed with De Laurentiis and departed before post-production wrapped. Peter Marinker dubbed a substantial portion of his dialogue, and the whole situation began because De Laurentiis' mother-in-law had seen Jones on The Dating Game and recommended him for the role. Queen's score became iconic, and Brian Blessed's delivery of Gordon's Alive became an enduring pop culture moment. The film achieved cult classic status over time. Edgar Wright cited it as a visual influence for Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and Seth MacFarlane's Ted functions essentially as a love letter to the film, with Jones appearing as himself. This biblical comedy arrived less than a year after Monty Python's Life of Brian, and critics immediately identified it as a derivative attempt to capitalize on that film's success. Dudley Moore, Richard Pryor, Madeline Kahn, and Dom DeLuise couldn't escape the unfavorable comparisons. Roger Ebert called it a very bad new comedy with third-rate college humor. The film holds 13% on Rotten Tomatoes, and 5 Orthodox Jewish groups protested the film for mocking their religion. The $4.5 million production actually grossed $14.2 million, so it broke even commercially. The critical reception remained brutal regardless. Director William Friedkin cast Al Pacino as an undercover cop investigating crimes in New York's gay leather scene, and massive protests erupted during filming in summer 1979. Journalist Arthur Bell of The Village Voice warned the film would incite anti-gay sentiment. Several hundred demonstrators marched through Greenwich Village, blowing whistles and shining lights into filming locations to disrupt scenes. Gay-owned businesses denied the crew access, and production had to re-record much of the dialogue due to protest interference. Friedkin claims he presented the film to the ratings board 50 times and deleted 40 minutes of footage to secure an R rating. When he later sought to restore the footage for DVD, United Artists had destroyed it. Pacino's 2024 memoir, Sonny Boy, revealed he viewed the finished film as exploitative of the community. Every dollar of his salary went anonymously to charities, and his explanation was simple. He didn't want to make it a PR stunt and just wanted one positive thing to come out of that whole experience. The $11 million production grossed $19.8 million, so financial disaster wasn't the issue. The controversy overshadowed everything else about the production. Robert Altman's live-action adaptation of the cartoon character earned the nickname Heaven's Gate, referencing Heaven's Gate, before it even reached audiences. An elaborate fishing village set rose in Malta over 7 months, requiring 165 tradespeople, 8 tons of nails, and 2,000 gallons of paint. That set still stands today as a tourist attraction called Popeye Village. Former Paramount CEO Barry Diller, promoting his 2025 memoir, called it the most substance-impaired film set he'd ever seen, claiming you couldn't escape it and that everyone was altered. Robin Williams made his first starring theatrical appearance here, fresh from Mork and Mindy. The poor reception threatened to derail his career entirely, and recovery didn't come until Good Morning Vietnam in 1987, 7 years later. The $20 million production actually grossed $49.8 million domestically, so it turned a profit technically. Critics considered it an artistic failure at the time, though it now holds 60% on Rotten Tomatoes. Steve McQueen's final film saw him playing real-life bounty hunter Ralph "Papa" Thorson. The $8 million production grossed $16.2 million, making it a modest underperformance rather than a true disaster. Leonard Maltin gave it his lowest rating, calling it McQueen's last picture and probably his worst. The tragic context surrounding this film runs deeper. Filming completed in late 1979, and in December of that year, the month after cameras stopped rolling, McQueen received a diagnosis, a rare aggressive form of lung disease, likely caused by asbestos exposure during his Marine Corps service between 1947 and 1950. McQueen passed on November 7, 1980, just 3 months after the film's release. He was 50 years old. The disasters of 1980 permanently changed Hollywood, and the Heaven's Gate rule became industry gospel. Never give a director unlimited creative control regardless of previous success. Studios reasserted authority over filmmakers, effectively ending the auteur-driven New Hollywood era that had defined the previous decade. Lou Grade's triple catastrophe with Raise the Titanic, Can't Stop the Music, and Saturn, 3 demonstrated that expensive spectacle without audience-tested concepts was financial devastation waiting to happen. And the Golden Raspberry Awards exist because John Wilson paid 99 cents to see Can't Stop the Music and Xanadu on the same night and couldn't get a refund. Career impacts varied dramatically across the board. Michael Cimino never recovered, and Marlon Brando disappeared for 9 years. Robin Williams struggled for 7 years before finding his footing again. Some films found redemption over time, with Flash Gordon, Xanadu, and even Heaven's Gate achieving cult classic status. Xanadu spawned a Tony-nominated Broadway musical decades later. These films proved that timing, audience taste, and studio oversight matter more than star power, lavish budgets, or Oscar-winning pedigrees. The lessons came at a cost exceeding $150 million in 1980 currency, roughly $590 million today, and they reshaped Hollywood's approach to risk and creative control for decades to come.